Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1939 series, and today I'm in one of the small salons at Schatzalp, and it's a game room. It has, if you could see higher up, it has some wallpaper with chess and domino motifs on it, which and that paper is original to the place. It also has the English library in the shelves that you can see some of behind me. And you know, it would have been a really nice place to come and chat with fellow patients that you were friendly with, or read a newspaper, or play cards, or whatever you wanted to do. Dmitri doesn't mention it specifically. I think he preferred to go over and have cocktails at the next door restaurant when he was feeling up to it. But you know, I'm sure he did wander in and out of this room from time to time. So we're doing today part 2 of the undated October letter from 1939. Since Dmitri wrote a letter to Maria on the 27th of October, we know this one, and one on the 23rd of September, we know this one is between those two. It's also written to his sister, of course. In the previous section of the letter, the first section of the letter, he was really preoccupied with political things, talking about, in particular, Poland, where the Red Army had decided to sort of take advantage of the fact that they were allies with Nazi Germany, and that Nazi Germany had invaded Poland, and the Red Army decided, well, we're going to do that too. We're going to go into Eastern Poland, and Dmitri was surprisingly against the success of the Soviets in Poland. He didn't want that. He didn't want that part of Poland that was a former part of the Russian Empire to be returned to Russia, to the Soviet Empire, you could say. So I found that interesting. Yeah, and he was generally concerned about overtures that Great Britain was making to the Soviet Union, trying to get them to break away from their alliance with Nazi Germany and to become allies of Britain and France. Okay, so those were big concerns of his at the time, and also big concerns apparently of Maria's. And he was also worried about that maybe that if he indulged himself too much in writing about politics and current events, that his letter, would be confiscated by the censorship. And so he told us that he would have liked to have written page after page after page, but he didn't feel like he could do it. Also, his hand was getting tired. So, all right, for our cast today, we have two very interesting people: James Heffley, who was Swiss, and Alexander Kazanbek, who was a Russian of Persian, I believe, or, yeah, Persian, Central Asian, let's say, but I think Persian descent, although by the time, I think it was his grandfather or great-grandfather who'd converted from Islam to Orthodoxy, and then, you know, the family was completely Russified. Anyway, let's get going. Yesterday evening, I had a long conversation with dearest Heffley. He has been mobilized, of course, and will return home only once every 2 weeks for 24 hours at a time. When he heard that I was at Schatzalp, he very kindly called me on the telephone. Incidentally, he had just received a letter from Alexander Kazanbek and read some of it to me. You know, Maria, it was just pathetic to hear, and it filled me with both pity and anger. Alexander continues to talk, and even very passionately, about his own accomplishments and the party's, and at such a moment Exclamation point. He intends to go to America soon, insisting that they are very interested in Young Russia's activities there, that America is very rich and one can raise a lot of money, always that issue, that the work of the Young Russia Party is going splendidly there and the visit is necessary. Poor Alexander, it's always the same. He mistakes his wishes and dreams for reality. Heffley, who was himself a great friend of Alexander's and who sat on the main council of the party, is now quite disappointed in both Alexander and the party. Exclamation point. The prospect of Alexander going to America really scares me. The more so given the world situation right now, exclamation point. Naturally, he hasn't mentioned it to me, knowing perfectly well that I would oppose it. Our diplomatic relations have at any rate been interrupted since the time I gave him 3,500 francs. Money is the driving force behind all of Alexander's travels. Politics are only a means to the end of amassing capital. Okay, interesting stuff. And of course, if it is going to have any interest to you, you're going to have to know who these people are, if you don't already. So James Emil Heffley, I wish I knew more about. He was 30 years old at this time. He was Swiss. And his father was certainly Swiss. His mother, her last name was Meyer, and I think probably Swiss or German too. But somehow or other, James was Orthodox. I don't know if he converted or somebody else, one of his parents converted, but he was Orthodox. And he came from a very successful business family. So his father had started Emil Heffley & Co. They were very innovative in their what they offered in the way of electrical components. I didn't put that very well. Anyway, very, very successful company, still going strong, I believe. So James had a doctorate in political science, but when his father died in 1939, I don't know what month, he took over the company and apparently did so very successfully. He lived in Basel. He was married at that time to an Argentinian woman, and he would go on and retire from his headship of the company in 1989 and then died in 2005. And when I found out that he'd still been alive, I graduated from the University of London in 2000 with my doctorate, and good Lord, I could have come to Basel or even if he'd been living in Bali, I would have gone there for the opportunity to talk to him about Dmitri. So that makes me sad. That was a completely wasted opportunity. Well, who knows if he would have wanted to chat with me anyway, but gosh, it could have been grand. He was also a very active member of the Young Russia Party, as Dmitri says. He was on the council, the executive council. Dmitri was the chairman of this executive council of the party. And so James Heffley is simply a mystery to me. Why was he Orthodox? Why was he involved with Young Russia? I hope someday to find out. If any of you know, please, I beg of you, let me know. He ended up being one of Dmitri's creditors. So Dmitri talks about how he had sent money at some point to Schatzalp, and that was a lot of money. He would have been paying about less than 1,500 francs a month to stay at Schatzalp. The problem with staying at Schatzalp is that you had to pay for a year in advance. So, that was difficult for him at first. But anyway, I'm going off topic here. Anyway, he and Schatzalp jointly took out a loan for Young Russia from Heffley for 8,000 francs. And by the time Dmitri died, Schatzalp was basically pretty much penniless. And I suppose Heffley hadn't, and Young Russia was more or less defunct. And I suppose Heffley hadn't wanted to bother Dmitri while Dmitri was alive, but he then tried to collect on the debt by suing Dmitri's estate. And I don't think he ever got anything. But anyway, Kazembek. Kazembek was a little older than Heffley, but of course younger than Dmitri. He was 37 years old. And he had not been raised in Central Asia, but in fact in European Russia, I believe in Petersburg or somewhere nearby. And he was the leader, the grand leader of the Young Russia Party. So the Young Russia Party, I've talked about it before. It was this weird organization. It started out as kind of a youth organization. It wasn't called a party. It was just Young Russia, the Young Russia Association, and it was aimed at the young people in the emigration, who were sort of caught between two worlds. So great, good idea. But then it became really political and became the Young Russia Party, and it was backed by both Grand Duke Cyril, and by Dmitri. Dmitri had a very active part in it. And it had this idea of trying to instigate a monarchist movement in Russia that would establish what Young Russia called a Soviet monarchy. And they had this slogan, I can't remember, what is it? Tsar of the Soviets, something like that. And it was very pro-Russian. It wasn't truly anti-Soviet. And in fact, Kazembek would end up going back to Russia in 1957 and living the rest of his life there in Stalinist Russia. Well, he outlived Stalin, but so Dmitri had been part of that, and the whole thing had really started falling apart. So Heffley was disillusioned with it. Dmitri was disillusioned with it, and really it had probably only been a matter of time. Kazembek was this very, very, very charismatic figure, and he loved to be up on the stage and at these big rallies, and he loved that. He ate that up, a man with a big ego, but a man who was also extremely neurotic and a real hypochondriac. His grandmother had taken him here to Davos, not at Schatzalp, but to Davos when he was a child. This happened a lot. Parents would freak out if their kid had a cough. Oh no, he might get tuberculosis. So they'd take their child to some mountain resort or seaside resort. And Alexander was, his grandmother was making this huge fuss over him, and everybody was here in Davos, oh, the poor sick little boy. And he just, he fell in love with Davos. He always wanted to come back, and he was always coming up with some health problem or other, and insisting that, that he was on the verge of dying, and so on and so forth. And, beneath this macho, robust, charismatic surface, he was a sort of a weakling, not a strong man, although he was able to project that. And Dmitri really fell under his sway for a while, and they were close. But then sooner or later, anybody who knew Kazembek, ended up putting two and two together and seeing that they were sort of being strung along by this guy. And it was more all about him being the head of the movement than it was about anything else. And so Dmitri and Heffley had both reached that point. Dmitri says he mistakes his wishes and dreams for reality. Dmitri had done that from time to time. We all do that from time to time. But Dmitri had really tried not to do that, especially after that experience of his in 1921 in Berlin. Any of you who watched those videos know that was sort of the end for him of having these pie-in-the-sky dreams. So, Kazembek, things were getting harder and harder for him. People had gotten fed up with him in Europe, so his grand idea was to go to the U.S. And before he could do that, he was arrested by the French authorities in 1940. And was it before or after the Germans had come in? I need to take another look at that. But Dmitri talks about it in his diaries. Dmitri kind of freaks out when he finds out that Cousin Beck has been arrested, because if Cousin Beck has been arrested, and also Dmitri's cousin, Vova Krasinski, was arrested. So various Young Russia Party members were arrested because they were considered to be pro-Soviet. And they were put in a concentration camp in Compiègne, not comparable to a Nazi concentration camp, but not a pleasant place. And so Cousin Beck already had this desire to go to the U.S., and as soon as he was released, in either 40 or 41, he did go to U.S., and he took Dmitri's little dog with him. Before Dmitri had gone to Schatzalp, he'd given his little dog, Sugar, his little Cocker Spaniel, to the Cousin Becks to take care of. And they took the dog with them to the U.S. And he didn't thrive in the U.S., He wasn't willing to sort of buckle down and work. He had some jobs in academia, but, he just really was always having these psychosomatic illnesses, and nothing would work out. And so he was always kind of on one step removed from poverty. And why was Dmitri, what he thought was going to happen in the U.S., that young Russia was going to be, a thing there like it had been in Europe? Well, of course he was wrong about that. I'm not sure, though, when Dmitri says that it really scares him, this idea of Alexander going to the U.S. And why is that? Was he afraid that Alexander was going to ruin it for him? That as far as, yes, the FBI did come and talk to Cousin Beck more than once, because of he was a fellow traveler with the Soviets. And so that had made life hard for him in France, and it made life hard for him in America. And maybe Dmitri was afraid that if he was persuaded by his sister and his ex at some point to come to America, he would have trouble too, because of his previous association with Cousin Beck. I don't know. That's just me guessing. Anyway, he went to America. Nothing worked out there. In 1957, he went to the Soviet Union and never left. And one of the last people he saw right before he departed on a plane to the Soviet Union was James Heffernan. And so if you're interested in any of this, there are two books that I highly recommend. One is a biography of Cousin Beck, and unfortunately it hasn't been translated in English. I should look into that, actually. That might be fun to do. But the Russian title translated is Truth is the Daughter of Time. So it's available in Russian. It wasn't written in Russian. It was written in French. And I don't know why I bought the Russian version. I should have bought the French version. But anyway, it was written by a woman named Mireille Massip. And she, I think, all her life kind of had this big crush on Cousin Beck. She'd been one of his students when he was teaching Russian and Russian literature to young college ladies in the U.S., one of the jobs he had. And she just sort of fallen head over heels for him. And years later, she wrote this fantastic biography of him. And, her eyes were wide open. She doesn't try to present him as any, in any kind of heroic light. She knew exactly who he was. But it's a fantastic book. You can get it on Google Play. That's where I got mine. And then another book that I'm making my way through by a writer named Viktor Kosik, K-O-S-I-K. It's in Russian. The Russian title in English is just Young Russia, Молодая Россия. And that is not about Cousin Beck. It's about the organization itself, the organization, the party, everything to do with it, everything that they published, and all their protocols and all that sort of thing. And so far, it's really a fascinating book, very detail-oriented. Okay, so next time, what do we have? Well, We're going to go to a completely different topic. So more about Dmitri's thoughts and impressions of the sanatorium and of Dr. Maurer and what life was like here at Schatzalp. And yeah, what, what he made of it. He's going to tell us that it reminds him a little bit of Ilinskaya, and yeah. So interesting stuff, I assure you. And that will be the last part of this letter. And where will we go to from there? Either to the diary or to a December letter that he wrote to his sister. Okay. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye.